Have you ever felt like you were moving with all your might, but the world around you remained still? That the air seemed too dense, time too short, and that each effort only deepened the same place? Perhaps this is the moment when something inside you begins to suspect that the truth isn't where they always said it was. From an early age, you were taught that merit is the only way, that you just have to try harder, insist more, resist more. But what if this more is exactly what keeps you stuck? We live under a myth disguised as virtue, the myth of effort as redemption, a myth so well told that few dare question it, even when the body gives in and the spirit falls silent. Have you ever noticed how society rewards exhaustion? How eyes fill with admiration when faced with those who destroy themselves for an invisible ideal? They call discipline what may be nothing more than fear. They call success what, in many cases, is merely survival disguised as achievement. Imagine a man pushing a cart up a hill. His hands bleed, his breath catches, but he believes. He believes because he's told the top awaits. But the top doesn't exist. There's only more climbing. And the harder he pushes, the more the ground tilts, as if mocking his faith and strength. The cart's weight is the same weight he carries within himself, the idea that effort alone liberates. But what is effort without direction? What is meaningless sacrifice? Perhaps the greatest prison lies not in the walls of the world, but in the invisible structures of the mind, those that mistake resistance for purpose. How many times have you confused weariness with progress? How many times have you believed that suffering was a sign you were on the right path? There's a breaking point in every human journey, a moment when exhaustion ceases to be an obstacle and becomes a revelation. At that moment, something whispers deep within your soul. What if the problem was never you? Perhaps you've only learned to push when you should have learned to move. The difference between those who sink and those who emerge lies not in strength, but in the fulcrum. And it's this point no one taught you that we're going to talk about. But first, look within and ask yourself, what in you still believes that suffering is proof of worth? This question may seem uncomfortable now, but it's where the real movement begins. Because perhaps, in the silence between one effort and another, you'll realize that you never lacked strength, only leverage. You spent your life hearing that you needed to try harder, sleep less, produce more, control yourself, and when your body called for a break, the world responded with silence, or with blame. There's a lack of discipline, they said, focus, strength. But what if what you've always lacked wasn't strength but leverage? There's something deeply unfair in the way you were led to believe that effort was enough. No one told you that the system was designed to reward not those who try hard, but those who learn to move forces greater than their own hands. Think of the colleague who seems to have luck in everything she does, the neighbor who grows while you stagnate, the creator who sleeps and yet multiplies their reach. At first glance, it seems like talent or chance, but chance is just the name we give to the unknown. The truth is that these people have learned to operate another kind of power, silent, invisible, multiplying. While some push the weight of life inch by inch, others build mechanisms that transform a single gesture into 1,000 movements. One man wakes up at 5, faces 2 commutes, and works until his body creaks. Another, at home, creates a system that operates for him. Both get tired, both want the same thing, dignity, security, peace. But only one of them understood that time is the true capital, and that effort, when not multiplied, is exhausted. How many times have you traded presence for urgency? How many times have you sacrificed moments of life believing that the future would give you back what you lost? And if that future never comes, who will give you back the present? The logic of merit is perfect because it sustains the myth of guilt. When you fail, the system convinces you it's because you didn't try hard enough. It doesn't matter if the game is rigged, the board is crooked, or the cards are already owned. The blame is always yours. It's a morality that feeds on your exhaustion and makes you call slavery a virtue. Carl called it the servant ethic. Jung would call it the collective shadow, the unconscious belief that suffering purifies. But suffering, when it doesn't illuminate, only consumes. Look around, praise still goes to those who endure, not to those who understand. We celebrate the doctor who hasn't slept in 2 days, the worker who endures the heat of the machine, the student who destroys himself with anxiety to be the best, and yet, we despise those who build something that liberates them. We call it cheating, luck, privilege, because we were educated to admire exhaustion and fear lightness. But the body, heart, and mind can't withstand this logic for long. When they break, the world simply replaces them, without gratitude, without honor, without remembrance. There's a common, almost invisible scene. Someone goes to bed late at night and feels the emptiness of a question echoing inside. Was it all worth it? This question has no ready answer. It's the crack through which consciousness enters. Because perhaps the value was never in the effort, but in the understanding. Understanding is the new effort. The mind, when trained, becomes the missing fulcrum. It's within it that lies the lever capable of transforming sweat into vision. And that's where the mystery begins. Because what comes next isn't about working less, but about thinking differently. The next part isn't about the body or time. It's about the invisible axis that moves both, the mind. And perhaps when you look inside it, you'll realize that the whole world has always been waiting for your first conscious move, courage to stop. This is the condition the system fears most. Because those who stop begin to see, and those who see change the game. It is in this moment of pause that the mind, previously addicted to running, realizes the absurdity of spending one's life pushing stones that could be moved with a light touch. If only we knew where to place the lever. The world doesn't reward movement, it rewards discernment. And yet, how many times have you felt guilty for slowing down? How many times have you confused stillness with weakness? Pause is the cradle of lucidity. Now imagine two people faced with the same task, building a boat. One works tirelessly, hammering wood, fighting the wind, measuring every inch with the strength of his body. The other, before lifting a single nail, studies the tides, the flow of the currents, the rhythm of the waves. When he finally acts, the sea carries him. The difference lies not in the effort, but in the harmony with the invisible structure of things. What if the world were an ocean and the mind the compass? How would you navigate if you discovered you no longer needed to row? It sounds poetic, but it's science. Neuroscience already proves that the human brain wasn't just designed to resist, but to anticipate and redesign patterns. Every thought creates connections, and these connections shape how we perceive reality. But what happens when we spend our lives training our brains only to react, not to create? We become prisoners of a working-class mind, incapable of realizing that thinking is also an act of construction. The world belongs not to those who work the hardest, but to those who understand the code that governs work. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to attract opportunities while others desperately struggle for a break? Perhaps the difference lies in the type of map they carry. Most navigate the maze without realizing that the walls are merely shadows cast by old beliefs. The fear of change is the most sophisticated prison of our time, and the most comfortable, because the pain of the familiar still seems more bearable than the uncertainty of freedom. But freedom, like every internal revolution, begins when one doubts one's own routine. There's a moment in the journey where consciousness splits. Keep pushing, or learn to move. This is the turning point. It's when the individual, for the first time, becomes the architect of their own structure. And the curious thing is that the world changes immediately, not because the world actually changes, but because the mind that perceives it no longer sees it the same way. Everything that once seemed like an obstacle becomes a potential lever. The problem was never the weight, it was where you supported it. But there's something deeper that hasn't yet been said. The mental lever isn't just a technique, it's a symbol. It represents the meeting between the conscious and the unconscious, between action and meaning. Jung would call this the beginning of individuation, the moment when a being stops living according to inherited values and begins to respond to their own inner calling. How many decisions in your life were truly yours? How many came from the collective voice that lives within you, disguised as reason, duty, and prudence? At this point, the suspense thickens, because what comes next is no longer about understanding the system. It's about confronting it. The true lever doesn't move stones, it moves destinies, and the price of using it is high. It requires you to abandon the illusion of control and accept the unknown as part of the journey. Are you ready for this? Because part 4 is no longer about effort or the mind. It's about what lurks behind both, the invisible power of the unconscious, and what happens when it awakens. There are times when life feels like a narrow corridor, lit only by cold, repetitive lights, a place where each step sounds the same as the last, as if time has lost its texture. This is how the system wants you, predictable, busy, docile. And it is at this point that the simple act of stopping, of breathing, of questioning, becomes a revolutionary gesture. While the whole world runs in circles, you stop. And this moment of immobility, which so many call weakness, is actually the moment when the axis of the world shifts a millimeter. It's when you realize that it was never exhaustion that kept you stuck, but the belief that you couldn't stop. Imagine a 6-year-old child drawing freely until an adult voice says, "Don't do it like that. Draw within the lines." At that moment, a spark is extinguished. The drawing continues, but the imagination recedes. Decades later, this same child, now an adult, works, meets goals, follows rules, and silently wonders why nothing seems enough. It's because from an early age, the system didn't teach you to create, only to repeat. The problem isn't that you lack discipline. It's that you were taught too much discipline and too little curiosity. But there's something curious. In 2018, a Stanford University study showed that the human brain in a daydreaming state is up to 40% more creatively active than when focused on a specific task. This means that the moment you disconnect may be your mind's most fertile. So why does the modern world condemn pause? Why is rest treated as guilt and slowness as failure? Perhaps because silence is dangerous. It is in silence that thought is born, and authentic thought is the most powerful form of disobedience. Consider the irony. School taught you to obey, but not to understand. Work taught you to produce, but not to create. Society taught you to follow, but not to see. And yet there are moments when the soul awakens, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes in traffic, sometimes in front of a blank screen. Something inside you whispers that there is more. This whisper is the beginning of liberation. It is the voice of the unconscious knocking on the door of consciousness, asking for space, asking for an ear, and most ignore it, thinking it's just fatigue. But it's not fatigue. It's a call. What if everything you feel as dissatisfaction is actually a message? What if the discomfort is the soul's impulse trying to push you out of the labyrinth? Jung said that what we most avoid looking at contains exactly what we need to transform ourselves. So what is this restlessness that follows you when the day ends? What is this emptiness that no achievement fills? Perhaps it's the echo of what you could have been, asking for passage. There are reports of people who, after a bankruptcy, a loss, or a crisis, describe the feeling of having awakened within their own lives, as if they had lived in the third person until then, and had suddenly taken control of the narrative. An executive who left $1 million job and discovered that her fear of falling was actually a fear of freedom. An engineer who, upon being fired, realized he hated what he'd been doing for 20 years. A monk who, after decades of silence, declared, "The noise of the world is just the fear of listening to one's own soul." These stories are not rare. They are the mirrors the collective unconscious uses to bring us back to our senses. And perhaps the turning point lies there, in the courage to question normality. When you begin to see the machinery and understand that you don't need to be part of it, the world begins to reveal its hidden meanings. The culture of effort, the myth of stability, the cult of productivity, everything falls apart at the mere glance of a clear-eyed eye, because lucidity is the true power that the system cannot control, and when it awakens, nothing is ever the same again. From this point on, the journey shifts from being against the system to being for the soul. The struggle shifts direction. It's no longer about conquering the world, but about awakening within it. And this is where the story takes its turn, because part 5 will no longer be about the prison. It will be about the crossing, the moment when the being, finally conscious, begins to walk on its own, with the unconscious as an ally, not an enemy. He said that convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies. You can question a lie, but you defend a conviction, even if it destroys you. And that's exactly what's been happening for generations. We've been taught to defend weariness as a virtue, to exalt obedience as wisdom, to confuse repression with character. But what is virtue when it demands self-forgetfulness? What remains of the human when authenticity is sacrificed in the name of acceptance? Perhaps the greatest mistake of modernity is to believe that maturing means giving up what one is. We live surrounded by invisible rules, designed to keep the gears turning. Work, produce, obey, repeat. But what happens when, in the midst of this machine, someone decides to stop and look within? Something breaks, first with fear, then with clarity. You discover that true failure isn't in falling, but in staying on a path that doesn't make sense? What if what you call failing is actually an unconscious act of resistance, a profound refusal to continue conforming to a mold that wasn't made for you? Look closely. The system that demands productivity from you will never care about your exhaustion. The culture that convinces you to sacrifice everything for work will never sacrifice itself for you. And yet there is a glimmer of light, the possibility of choosing differently. The beginning of liberation is not escape, it is doubt. Saying, "I don't know if I want to continue like this," is the first step toward awareness. Because doubting, deep down, is remembering that there is something within you that is still alive, something that resists domestication. But here's a twist: leverage. That force of amplification we so desperately seek only makes sense when there is essence. Multiplying emptiness is merely echoing nothingness. Growing without direction is accelerating toward nowhere. That's why the Greeks used the word telos, purpose, purpose. It's not what you do, it's why you do it. Telos, the silent frequency that vibrates at the center of your existence, the one that still speaks, even when the world is silent. Have you ever wondered what your telos, what in you deserves to be multiplied? In a culture that measures value by metrics and relevance by likes, asking this question has become an act of rebellion. Who do you want to be when no one is watching? Is the question that separates those who live from those who merely function. And true answers don't fit into spreadsheets or corporate speeches. They live in another dimension, that of eternity, not as a religious concept, but as the continuity of what matters. Da Vinci's art, Socrates' thought, Martin Luther King's voice, are echoes of telos who have crossed centuries because they were born aligned with the truth. But purpose alone does not sustain the work. It needs to be refined until it becomes arete, the quiet excellence. It's what moves the artist who rehearses without an audience, the writer who rewrites the same paragraph until his heart aligns with the word, the caregiver who treats one life as if it were the whole world. Arete is the act of refining the soul until it becomes a channel for something greater. When telos and arete come together, work stops being effort and becomes expression, and it is only then that true leverage occurs, not as a trick, but as a bridge. It is the technology that liberates rather than imprisons, the book that speaks when you're already gone, the system that multiplies consciousness rather than dependence. When purpose meets excellence, time ceases to be the enemy. What you create begins to live without you, and that is what we call legacy. But beware, the world tries to reverse this order. It teaches you to seek scope before having substance, to speak before having something to say, to grow before understanding. The result is loud and empty voices, meaningless relevance, success that implodes from within. The rush to be seen has killed the silence that reveals who we are. That's why so many people shine for a moment and then disappear, because they mistook echo for voice. True power lies not in projecting yourself, but in aligning yourself. Real leverage isn't about reaching millions, it's about achieving depth. Time cannot destroy what is true, only what was built on fear or vanity. What is born of purpose endures. What is born of haste evaporates. Therefore, if there is a call on this journey, it is this: stop rushing. Listen to what is still true within you. Refine it, multiply it, because in the end, the body tires, the name fades, but what was done in alignment with the purpose becomes a living force in the collective unconscious. This is transcendence. This is the movement that conquers time. This is the freedom that the system can never grant, because it is born within, and no one can take it away. It was there, in the silence of dawn, faced with the accumulated fatigue of years, that something broke inside, and from that rupture a flash of lucidity was born. For the first time I realized that effort alone is not noble. What is noble is the discernment that guides it. Until then, I believed life was a race, but I discovered it was a construction. And every construction begins when we stop running in circles and choose to build something that will remain standing, even when the body needs rest. You don't have to abandon everything overnight. You just need to stop living on autopilot. 1 minute of awareness changes more than 1,000 hours of repetition. Notice the next time you're about to say, "I have no choice." Notice the moment you repeat what you've always done, without asking yourself why. It's in that moment that something new can be born, not as a noisy revolution, but as a silent decision. To think before acting, to choose before obeying. True transformation begins with simple thoughts, but courageously sustained. Start small, but start differently. If your work consumes you, find a way to make it a bridge, not a prison. If you feel like you're wasting your talent, create something, a project, an idea, a gesture that can live beyond you. Write, teach, share, build. Use knowledge as leverage, time as an ally, your mind as a tool. Stop measuring progress in hours and start measuring it in direction. You don't need to do more, you just need to do what makes sense. The lever's path is slower at first, but it's the only one that truly advances. With each conscious choice, you loosen a link in the chain. With each new thought, you weaken the gears of repetition. Before you know it, the wheel that once held you back will begin to turn on its own. Now for you, not against you. It's at this point that freedom ceases to be an idea and becomes a practice. But know that this process isn't easy. It requires patience, vulnerability, and faith in something that doesn't yet exist. It requires trust in the invisible, enduring the void between what was and what is becoming. This space between two worlds is uncomfortable, but it's also the cradle of all reinvention. It's there that the soul breathes again, the unconscious becomes a guide, and purpose takes shape. And when this transformation begins, something changes forever. The fear of uncertainty gives way to the serenity of someone who has finally understood their own strength, because the lever is not an external tool. It is the internal alignment between what you do and who you are. When these two parts meet, time bends. Small actions multiply. The right words touch those who need to be touched. Life finally becomes a living work, sustained not by sweat but by meaning. So, if you've made it this far, perhaps this is your time. The time to stop spinning and start moving. The time to trade speed for direction, anxiety for clarity, blind effort for conscious creation. Don't expect a greater sign than this. The simple fact that you're listening to the end is proof that something within you has already begun to awaken. Now I invite you to be part of this movement. If this video touched you in any way, even if it was just a slight annoyance, a question, a spark, leave a comment even if it's anonymous. Share what you felt, like the video if it made you think, and subscribe to the channel to continue this journey with us. Because transformation doesn't happen alone. It begins in every mind you dare to see. And maybe, just maybe, your vision will be the force that moves the world just a millimeter further tonight.